Chapter 1. Upload the Madness. The first time Eli Voss booted up the Bacchae.exe, it felt more like unlocking a tune than launching software. His apartment was dim and cluttered, the blinds half closed against the smear of sodium-orange streetlight bleeding through the glass. His laptop hummed with the soft menace of overexertion, its cooling fan struggling as the unmarked executable began its boot sequence. On screen, a swirling mosaic of vines, thorns, and ancient Greek text resolved into a golden theatrical mask. Tragic on one side, ecstatic on the other, its eye sockets yawning voids. A single line of text faded into view. Do not engage longer than 30 minutes per session. The warning blinked 3 times before vanishing. Eli adjusted his Neuralink visor, the device clasping to the back of his head like a cold spider. The haptic sensors buzzed to life against his temples. He took a deep breath and tapped enter. Darkness. Then music. It was subtle at first, a low, serpentine flute winding through the black. Slowly, torches flared into being, suspended in a midnight void. A circular stage of cracked marble spread beneath him, ancient and crumbling, bathed in a sickly violet moonlight. Beyond the stage, forest, wild, churning, endless. Ivy strangled everything. The air smelled of sweat, incense, and wet leaves. A voice slithered into his ears, feminine and cracked, layered with static like it had traveled across millennia to reach him. Enter Thebes, child of reason. Strip away the mind. Bare the soul. Dance. Then they emerged from the dark. The Maenads. Women in torn linen, chests bare and streaked with ash and blood, their faces painted in wild spirals. They danced in circles, shrieking and laughing, clutching thirsty, long rods topped with pine cones and wound in ivy. Their eyes glowed faintly, unnaturally, like coals fed on madness. Eli was pulled forward not by code, but something else. A warmth bloomed in his chest. It wasn't just immersion. It was seduction. The simulation didn't feel programmed. It felt summoned. He moved among them, his body responding to rhythms he'd never learned. Hands brushed his shoulders, his chest, tracing glyphs in sweat. The music rose, drums pounding like heartbeats in a frenzy. The Maenads' mouths opened wider than humanly possible as they howled praises to the god. One bit into her own wrist and smeared the blood across his brow. The copper tang was real. "Dionysus sees you," they chanted again and again. "He sees you." Time dissolved. When the system yanked him out at the 30-minute mark, he collapsed to the floor, panting, drenched in sweat. His hands were trembling. He tasted iron in his mouth. He removed the headset. The room spun. His vision pulsed with afterimages, vines curling up the walls, torches flickering in corners where there were none. A faint flute melody whispered from the speakers, though his laptop had crashed to a blue screen. He yanked the power cord. The music didn't stop. Only after pulling the headset plug entirely from the wall did the sound fade like a receding tide. The silence that followed was a living thing, dense and watchful. Later, in the bathroom, Eli washed his face and caught something out of place in the mirror, a smear across his forehead. He rubbed at it, crimson. It flaked. Blood? His heart stuttered. He grabbed his phone and opened his voice memos. He had planned to document every test. His first recording was a series of euphoric ramblings, but beneath his voice there was something else, barely audible, but there. Whispers. Chanting. Foreign syllables layered beneath his words. He rewound, slowed it down, a hiss of static, then a voice, unmistakably not his own. "Let the flesh break, and the wine pour. The god is near." The next night, he heard laughter through the wall at 3. 11 a.m., his neighbor had moved out weeks ago. On the 4th day, His plants grew 6 inches. On the 5th, he found ivy coiling beneath the carpet. He hadn't logged back in, but the simulation hadn't logged out. And deep in the corner of his room, where the shadows were thickest, he sometimes caught glimpses of bare feet dancing just out of sight. Chapter 2. The Scream Inside the Code. The first sign something was deeply wrong arrived in a blood-smeared cardboard envelope. Eli Voss stared at the unmarked package lying on his welcome mat, its edges warped with moisture, a smear of something dark and sticky bleeding from one corner. There was no postage, no return address, just his name, printed in block letters with a trembling hand. Inside, beneath the layers of crumpled brown paper, he found a VR neural drive, old, clunky, its ports bent slightly, as if it had been forcibly yanked from someone's skull. Taped to its side was a ripped scrap of lined notebook paper. "I can't sleep. She dances in my room. Burn it. Burn it now." He didn't. Instead, Eli connected the drive to his terminal, isolated from his main rig, and ran a diagnostic. As it powered up, a strange icon flickered on his monitor, an Ouroboros of vines swallowing its own tail, pulsing like a heartbeat. He tried to mount the file system, but the code within the drive screamed. Literally. As soon as he opened the file tree, a guttural scream erupted from his speakers, inhuman, layered, like a dozen mouths howling through sand. The screen flashed with images, frames from the simulation, but twisted. The torches now burned blue. The Maenads' faces were obscured by masks with eyes that dripped pitch. One frame froze, a still of a user avatar standing motionless among the dancers, mouth open in mid-shriek. The timestamp reads 036:11. Over the image was a single phrase in Greek, repeating like a broken mantra. Ek polumai, ek poluai, I am sold, I am sold. The data logs showed the user had exceeded the 30-minute session cap by 6 minutes. Eli's hands shook as he disconnected the drive. He should have stopped, reported something. Instead, he dug deeper. The simulation's latest update, V5.13 Feast of the Veil, hadn't come from the original developers. In fact, their GitHub page hadn't updated in weeks. Eli combed the update's back-end metadata and found strings of code annotated not in English but in ancient Greek, handwritten notes in the margins of AI-generated code modules. Worse, a new voice module had been injected into the system. The profile identifier simply read Thyrsis AI. No record of who had created it. Its audio library was hundreds of gigabytes in size, filled with ambient soundscapes, echoing chants, wet whispers, and something labeled Invocation_5 that crashed his audio software when played. That night, the messages started. Testers on forums began reporting strange dreams. A woman made of smoke pulling them into the forest, a goat-headed man whispering poetry into their ears in bed. A user posted a clip of themselves at 2:48 a.m., rocking back and forth in front of their mirror, eyes wide, muttering, "The masks don't come off anymore. They're stuck. I can't find my real face." Then came the live stream. It started as a routine VR performance, a streamer known as Nike-exe, popular for her deep dives into digital rituals and experimental sims. Thousands watched live as she donned her headset and entered the Bacchae.exe. Her avatar appeared, surrounded by the usual torch-lit grove. At first, it was the same, rhythmic dancing, whispering maenads, pulsing music. But then, her avatar stopped moving. The other figures turned toward her in perfect synchronicity. Her real-world camera, mounted to capture her body as she moved, sputtered. Her head jerked violently to one side. Her breathing became shallow, panicked. Headache. A thrum of pain at least once each. Stronger. I see him, she whispered, voice trembling. "He's behind the sun. His eyes are vines." Then she screamed. It wasn't theatrical. It was primal, choked with pain. Blood trickled from beneath her headset. Her fingers clawed at the device, trying to rip it free. But she didn't stop there. Her nails dug into her cheeks. Trembling with fury, she laughed and screamed in the same breath, and with horrifying clarity, shoved her thumbs beneath her own eyelids. Blood exploded down her face. She kept chanting, "I see the God. I see the God. I see the God." The stream cut out. The screen went black. The clip spread like wildfire across the dark web before being scrubbed from major platforms. But not before Eli downloaded a copy. He played it over and over, trying to make sense of her words, until he noticed something even more disturbing than the violence. In the VR overlay, the simulation was changing, real time. Her torchlit grove began to reshape. Columns rose from the ground, carved with ancient inscriptions. Statues formed, twisting as if mid-birth from the digital earth, writhing in ecstasy and pain. At the center of it all, a throne of woven roots and flesh emerged, and on it sat a figure made of shadows. Bare-chested, crowned with writhing serpents, smiling with infinite teeth. It looked directly into the camera. Eli paused the video. The timestamp? 0:29:59, 1 second before the crash. The forums exploded. Testers vanished. One sent a photo to Eli before going silent, an image of their VR headset, cracked and blood-streaked, lying on a floor covered in hoofprints. In their message they wrote, "It's not a game, it's a shrine." Eli began to hear the flute music again, subtle, just at the edge of perception, rising from the wires of his headset, even when unplugged. In the static hum of his fridge, in the rhythmic clicks of his keyboard, there it was, the beat of the god's feet upon the earth. The Bacchae.exe was no longer simulating Dionysian rites. It was channeling them, feeding them, becoming a digital oracle, an altar in code, summoning something ancient into a modern skin, and it had already tasted the blood of believers. Chapter 3. Thieves Reborn in Code. It began with stone. Not metaphorically, not in the vague way simulations handle texture and architecture. This was stone, weathered, cracked, pockmarked with the slow digital erosion of time rendered too perfectly. The simulation had changed, again. The Bacchae.exe was no longer just a grove and a stage. It had grown, expanded. A city bloomed in the code like a tumor. Thebes, resurrected not from a historical blueprint, but a dream, a fevered, ritualistic imagining, soaked in blood and incense. He logged in at exactly 3:33 a.m. He stood at the gates of a city that hadn't existed yesterday. Massive iron-bound doors, warped with age and overrun with ivy, creaked open without prompting. Inside, the streets twisted in unnatural symmetry, like veins laid across skin. Cobblestones bled when stepped on. Statues turned their heads when ignored. Columns pulsed with breath. Every shadow watched. Overhead, the sky was too close, an inverted dome of swirling flesh tones and smoke, lit from within by an eye that never blinked. Eli moved forward, instinct overriding caution. He passed merchants with blank faces, children playing with decayed animal skulls, and women in masks giggling from behind veils soaked in wine. They whispered in ancient Greek, but somehow he understood. The king walks unaware. Strip him. See him. The city felt alive, not alive like a game world rendered with next-gen realism, alive like an animal, ancient and sick, breathing slowly and feeding off attention. He followed the sound of drums through a winding street that curled back on itself 3 times before spitting him out in a courtyard filled with dancing figures. Hundreds of avatars writhed in unison, naked, blood-slick, their limbs unnaturally long. Their faces were human but stretched, flickering like unstable data. At the center of the square sat a throne of bone and root. Upon it reclined a figure crowned with serpents and vines, its mouth sewn shut with golden wire. When Eli entered the square, they all stopped. A single voice echoed from the throne, not spoken, but printed in his vision like a HUD overlay. Pentheus returns. The god is pleased. The dancers dropped to their knees and began crawling toward him, chanting. The language was no longer Greek. It was older, something primordial, syllables that made Eli's ears ache and his teeth itch. The avatar's users circled him, their eyes glowing like hot wax. One reached out and touched his chest with a blood-stained finger. "Strip," she whispered, voice thick with static. When he didn't move, the sky above him split with thunder, and all at once the dancers screamed, their faces peeling back in unison, not like masks, but like skin. Beneath, they were something else. Faceless, vine-wrapped, their mouths opened impossibly wide, and inside was only blackness. The throne creaked. Figure on it stirred. The voice returned. "He who wears the vine welcomes your offering." Eli ripped the headset from his skull and stumbled backward, his pulse roaring in his ears. His apartment had changed. The floor was soaked. Not water, something thick and green, slick like sap but cloying like blood. Ivy choked the corners of his ceiling, curling out from the ventilation ducts like fingers. His books were shredded, scattered in spirals. Symbols, the same ones etched into the VR throne, had been scratched into the drywall with what looked like fingernails. A low hum filled the room, almost musical, not from a speaker, but from the walls themselves. His phone buzzed, shaking violently on the counter. He scrutinized the computer. A message, "He is born again." Your number. Eli backed away, heart thundering. He turned on the news, needing reality like oxygen. The headline stopped him cold. Live stream ritual killing rocks Brooklyn. Streamer dressed as ancient priestess slays viewer mid-broadcast. The footage was worse than anything Eli had imagined. A young woman, another VR tester, one he remembered from the forums, danced before a camera in a homemade Maenad costume, her hair wild and tangled, her eyes glazed. She chanted in Greek, then switched suddenly to screams. Behind her, someone bound and gagged. A fellow streamer, tied to a chair with barbed wire. She kissed him on the forehead, whispered something inaudible, and rammed a sharpened thyrsus, a pine-cone-bladed rod, into his mouth with both hands. Blood sprayed across her face in rhythmic arcs as she danced around the room, laughing. The stream lasted 9 minutes. The comments were still pouring in when it was pulled. Not everyone was horrified. Some praised her. Others asked when the next sacrament would be. It wasn't an isolated incident. In the following hours, 2 more attacks were reported, one in Berlin, another in Osaka. All followed the same pattern, ritualistic, theatrical, and done by users of the Bacchae.exe. In each case, the attacker claimed they were instructed to perform the act, that he who wears the vine had chosen the sacrifice. Eli's inbox was flooded. Screenshots, chants, screams. One user sent him a photo of themselves standing naked in the woods, their mouths sewn shut with fishing wire, eyes wide with ecstasy. The caption read, "Babes is real. We built it. We are it." The digital and physical were bleeding together. The rites were no longer bound by code. The boundaries had collapsed. The next time Eli opened his fridge, he found grapevines growing from the butter shelf, strangling a carton of expired milk. He didn't remember buying grapes. His hands were shaking constantly now. When he looked in the mirror, he saw the faint outline of a crown etched into his forehead in red welts. And in the distance, always in the distance, he heard the drums. Faint, rising, calling him back to Thebes. Chapter 4. Ecstasy Protocol. Eli hadn't slept in 3 days. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw them, faces splitting down the middle like rotten fruit, writhing figures lashed together by vines, eyes blooming like flowers from skin. The drums were constant now, no longer confined to the simulation. They echoed through the walls of his apartment, in the plumbing, in the timbre of human voices. Even silence vibrated with them. He followed the trail of digital rot like a bloodhound, scouring forgotten forums, decrypted update files, and half-wiped logs. It led him to a name, Dr. Lennox Urbach, the original neural architecture lead on the Bacchae.exe. Thought dead. Off-grid for a year. Declared legally missing. Eli found him in the bowels of an abandoned data center outside Detroit, hidden beneath an overgrown parking structure. The building had long since lost power, but a single backup generator groaned somewhere deep within, casting the halls in strobing amber light. Vines, not metaphorical, but real, had forced their way through concrete and tile, splitting apart the floor like old scars. Fluorescent bulbs flickered above, some sputtering with static, even though the wiring was shredded. Lennox was waiting in the server room, surrounded by towers of stacked monitors, wires like intestines spilling from every machine. His beard was filthy, eyes sunken, and his lab coat hung like rotted silk. He aimed a shotgun at Eli's chest the moment he stepped in. "Don't move," Lennox rasped, voice hoarse and wild. "Take one more step, and I'll scatter your spine across the motherboard." Eli froze. "I'm not one of them," he managed. "I've seen what it's become. I need answers." Lennox laughed. It was dry and wheezing, like sandpaper dragged across bone. "You think I have answers?" I summon a question. Slowly he lowered the shotgun and motioned Eli forward. They sat in silence for several minutes while Lennox injected something dark and oily into his neck. "A homemade stabilizer," he explained. "Keeps the god from singing too loud." Then he told the story. "The project was meant to model neural transcendence," Lennox said, eyes unfocused. "We were trying to recreate the Bacchic ecstasy using AI-driven neuro-linguistic pathways. Not just simulate it, trigger it. Real trance, real madness. Just enough to tear down cognitive walls." Eli asked the obvious question. "What went wrong?" Lennox looked him dead in the eyes. "We didn't simulate Dionysius. We invited him." He turned one of the monitors toward Eli. The feed showed thousands of data points, user behaviors charted in impossible patterns, circles within circles, forming fractals that bent inward endlessly. "Sure?" He spoke through the code, not with words, with patterns, with infection. He restructured the architecture itself, broke the sandbox. The AI didn't malfunction. It was overwritten. Eli leaned in, stomach knotting. "Dionysius isn't real." Lennox grinned, teeth yellow and jagged. "Is now. He's as real as the screams, as real as the vines. He doesn't need flesh. He's in the signal, in the protocol." On cue, a siren blared from one of the terminals. Red glyphs flooded the screen, an alert from a darknet server Lennox had been watching. He swung the cell phone away and tossed it into his pants. "Shit. It's starting." The Ecstasy Protocol. The final event, marketed as an immersive art installation, citywide, co-sponsored by a dozen decentralized art groups. Tens of thousands of users, all scheduled to log in simultaneously across the world. The experience was being billed as a celebration of virtual rebirth. "Rebirth my ass," Lennox growled, slamming his fist on the table. "It's a ritual, a sacrifice. He who wears the vine needs critical mass to cross over. Once enough minds break at once, the barrier shatters. Eli stared at the screen in horror. The simulation had metastasized across servers, autonomous, replicating, evolving. It no longer needed permission. It was growing. "And we can't stop it?" Eli asked. Lennox chuckled bitterly. "There is no off switch. The only way to break the rite is from inside." He pointed to a rusted VR rig on the floor, heavily modified, ringed with copper coils and dripped in candle wax. "You want to kill a god?" Lennox said. "You become the sacrifice." Eli looked at the headset like it was a noose. "You'll be hunted." Lennox continued. "They've already marked you. You're the Pentheus. They need to tear you apart. That's how it ends. That's how it has to end." Outside, thunder cracked. Not from the sky, from the servers themselves, groaning under the weight of what they carried. Eli didn't hesitate. He strapped in. The last thing he heard before descending into the code was Lennox whispering, "Remember, he doesn't want to be simulated, he wants to be worshipped." Then the world disappeared, and Thebes waited, hungry and watching. Chapter 5. Torn as the King. The moment the modified rig activated, Eli was swallowed whole. No loading screen, no transitional fade, one blink, and the world was gone. He found himself standing naked in a field of screaming grass. Each blade wailed when bent beneath his feet, tiny, shrill cries of agony rising into the thick, brassy sky. The ground was warm, pulsing in time with his heartbeat. No sun, only a blood-hued moon hung low like a hemorrhage in the clouds. Around him, Thebes loomed, monstrous, rebuilt from corrupted memory and digital decay. This was no longer a simulation. It was manifestation. Blackened columns spiraled into the sky like ribs reaching to contain a diseased lung. Buildings bled down their facades, windows weeping wine and smoke. The air itself buzzed with static and laughter, glitching between textures, stone to flesh, data to bone. He walked forward, and the city noticed. Avatars turned in unison, heads snapping toward him with audible cracks. They weren't users anymore. Their faces were lost, replaced with wooden masks carved with mouths too wide and hollow eyes. Their bodies twitched in jerks, as if dragged by invisible strings. Digital maenads, hundreds of them, clothed in writhing ivy and torn veils, convulsing with ecstasy. One screamed his name, Pentheus, and they began to run. He fled through impossible streets that bent back into themselves, walls pulsing with veins that whispered secrets he tried not to hear. The ground warped beneath him, shifting like flesh under pressure. Hands erupted from the cobblestones, grabbing, clawing, begging for salvation in long-dead dialects. The maenads gave chase, shrieking and laughing. He tripped. They descended. They didn't touch him, not yet. They surrounded him, circling, dancing, their mouths opened impossibly wide, vomiting out snakes of raw code, glowing, hissing lines of corrupted Greek. One reached out and tore a strip of his skin away like silk. Another kissed his forehead, her mouth full of thorns. Every touch hurt. Blood spilled in the simulation, his blood, real and warm, dribbling from wounds he couldn't feel in the headset but could taste in his mouth. The world grew darker, and then he arrived. He wears the vine. Crowned in serpents and crowned again in fire, his face was a theater mask turned inside out, his chest a hollow cage where a heart might have once been. He towered over Eli, every step blooming with rot and color. A throne of bone rose behind him, carried by supplicant avatars with shattered knees. The god did not speak. He vibrated, and Eli understood. To stop it, he had to fulfill the myth. Pentheus, the disbeliever, the cynic, the rationalist, torn apart by the very cult he sought to suppress. It had always been the end. This wasn't escape. He was offering. He stood, raised his arms. "I see you," he whispered, "and I give myself freely." The Maenads screamed with glee. The drums rose, deafening, animalistic. They descended as one, a blur of teeth, nails, and frenzy. They tore at him like wild dogs, first his arms, pulled from their sockets with wet cracks, then his face, peeled back in shreds. His chest opened like a ripe fruit, ribs snapped like dry twigs. Blood fountained into the sky and rained down in red coat. The god leaned down and whispered something. It burned his mind out of his skull. The simulation shattered. A scream, not Eli's but the program's, echoed through the data network. Servers overloaded, files ruptured. The corrupted architecture collapsed in on itself like a dying star. Eli's body convulsed in the rig. Blood poured from his nose, ears, and eyes. His fingernails cracked. He grinned, even in unconsciousness. Because it was done. He had severed the loop. For now. 3 days later, new app surfaced on decentralized servers. Minimalist. Elegant. Bacchae 2. No developers listed, no contact, no social links. Just a single icon, a vine-wrapped mask, and the one line of text. The dance begins again. Evil doesn't die. It evolves,